Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to the Childcare Business Growth Podcast. Now, I know I'm usually excited about most of the podcasts that we do, or pretty every one of them, but in this one in particular, there was a session I attended back in November, and it's called the Shift Conference, run by a great lady called Kathy Ligon from Hinge Advisors. And there's one particular session just before when I spoke at that event, and it really stuck with me. It really resonated with me. Now, this is all around how do we optimize our workforce to perform? Just the title alone is just really worth thinking about. Think about how that impact that could have in your business. And there is no one better, I think, honestly, to touch on this subject. This really had a profound impact on me. We have the former president of Childcare. Now, those of you that are in this industry will know if not the biggest childcare provider in the world. We are very excited to have Wei-Li Chong on today. Wei-Li, I am unbelievably grateful, first of all, you giving up your time to be here. Your session at that event really stuck with me. And I'm not going to do it any justice, but would you mind, if you don't mind, just give us a bit of an introduction to you first,
Sure.
And a bit of your background so people have some context, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for your kind words. What a great conference it was for, so many people, operators and investors in the industry. And for me, my passion has always been helping talent thrive. My background has been about 25 years in human resources. I actually joined Childcare back in 2012 when Nick was really struggling. It was on 14 quarters of consecutive decline,
Okay.
really struggling, top and bottom line, just from a business standpoint. And to give your audience context, a little bit more than 1,400 locations in the U.S. across 40 states, and about 30,000 employees. And there was a new CEO that came in. His name is Tom Wyatt, and I was his first executive hire. And he said the magic words to me. He said, "Gosh, there's so many things that we can do operationally for this company, but if we can't get the culture on the right path, I don't think anything else will work." Well, that was kind of music to my ears, and I joined in August of 2012. And the short story is, we just went on a run, 25 quarters of growth. We were literally enrolling 3 to 4 times the industry average. And our success really boiled down to how we created an environment that optimized every center, the teachers, the assistant directors, and the directors of every location to really focus on things that mattered most. And through that process, I was given the opportunity. I moved from HR into operations, and then was ultimately the president of the organization.
I love that. So I generally, honestly, do not think there's anyone better to speak on this subject. There was this particular moment you touched on at the event that I'm sure you're going to delve into. But what would you say was the kind of the transition point for you? As you said, you were on decline for multiple quarters there. Company was, shrinking technically, and then you come in and something magical happened. And I remember you mentioned at the event that you touched on, we didn't spend more money on marketing, but we managed to completely flip around our enrollment. How do you do that, particularly of a company of such size?
Yeah, if I boiled it down to one thing, I believe we got everybody excited about what the company stood for. Now, at the time, with all good intent, the company was focused on child safety, right? Really hard to argue. But the positive intent really created an unintended consequence, which was really a culture of fear. They were very compliance driven. They were very focused around licensing and all of those elements that are so critical to our industry. But it created so much focus that it actually created a lot of fear in teachers. And what we wanted to do is shift the mindset. And I'll talk a lot about what that mindset really looks like. But if your audience really thought about what makes the best provider of childcare and early learning in their community, and you look at that and answer that question from a standpoint of a parent, it starts to give you a really good idea of what matters most. And we were able to really rally the entire organization around a very simple, very clear view around we wanted to be the best in every community we served. And that really started a number of things that we did to really get people moving in the right direction.
Love that. Okay, well, I'm excited to delve into this. Where do you want to start, Wei-Li? Where should we get this story started?
I think the best place maybe to start is, I always like to start with self-awareness. I think one of the biggest challenges that we had was really just simply shifting the mindset of directors. And I know a lot of your audience, whether they own 2 centers or they own 15 centers or even more than that, how do you actually look at the level above the center and that center director? And here's why that's important. At a center director level, we know they can have the best laid plans, but the moment that you walk into that center that day, a teacher calls out sick. Maybe a parent's upset from something that happened the other day. There's things that are happening that are just unplanned. And from there, you're just reacting to the day and you lose time. So we know time is the most precious commodity to help center directors really think about, how do I take control of that? Now, that's center director. The next level above that, whatever regional directors, district managers, or call a lot of different things, and maybe that's just the ownership level. It's how do you actually communicate to those centers in a way that simplifies the focus so that you can really align the centers to be operating in the very best way. So the first thing, Nick, is now think about your time spent. How much of it is proactive? How much of it is reactive? And if you're saying, gosh, all I feel like is I'm reacting, we need to shift that. And the way to shift that is to think about, how do I take control of building my center to be the best provider in my community? It's as simple as that. So that's the first step that I would think about, Nick. And I don't know if that resonates with you around just the challenge of time, but I find that that's the first hurdle to overcome.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, the 2 points there you touched on is very fear-based in general as an industry. I think a lot of us are that mindset. And also, as you say, reactive rather than proactive. I generally couldn't agree more from our own experiences too. It's always reactive things rather than being proactive. So no, couldn't agree more. I love that. It's taking that mindset of being a proactive approach rather than just reactive to things. So how do we go about that? How do we get that shift? Because that's a big thing to kind of overcome, isn't it? I use the analogy when we go along to events. You might go to Shift Conference, or clients have just finished our event in Orlando. You have a ton of amazing things you want to implement from great speakers. And then you go back on Monday morning, back to the day-to-day, and the day-to-day reactive takes over again. Yeah. So how does that mindset shift work?
Yes. So from a mindset shift, I want you to answer this simple question of, are you the best provider in your community? And the way that I define that in the most simplest terms is that parents feel that you are the best place for their children. We know parents within each age group, they forge their own play dates and their own networks, and they're constantly talking about, what are you doing for your child? Well, when they're having that conversation, how many of those parents are saying, I can't imagine anywhere else to leave my child during the day than your center, right? Now, think about that for a second. How many parents are actually having that conversation about your center? That is a mindset shift that you have to control. Now, the simple answer is occupancy, right? It's no different than the best restaurant in your community. It's the one that's the hardest to get a reservation. You've got to plan in advance.
Yes.
Right. So there's a waiting list. You want to make your reservation a few weeks in advance. You can't wait to be there. Well, I want childcare providers and early learning providers to think the same way. The reflection of being the best in your community is that you should have waiting lists for each age group in your classrooms. Now, that's where you want to be. How do you get there? It starts with then your team. How stable is your team? Do your teachers love coming in every day? Are they supported in the right way? And are they forging relationships? So that's all the starting point. If I were to plant a flag, a bit of a North Star, it would be highly occupied center, which is which defines you as the best provider in your center. And then it's about, okay, how do we actually get there if you're not quite there? One of the things from mindset, Nick, that I remember just going into a lot of centers, and this might resonate with some folks, they would often say, I like to focus on the children that I have versus the children that I don't have. Meaning, I'm not really comfortable touring and enrolling and having that focus. I really want to just focus on the children I have. And I used to say to them, I love that. You always have to focus on the children that you have, but you also have to realize that those children are getting older. And as a director, it's about creating the right pipeline and getting that, filling your center and being that reflection of the best. So just the simple mindset of, yes, you have to care about both the ones that you have and the ones in the community that may not see you as the best place for their child. You want to impact those as well. So that's a big mindset shift, Nick.
I love that. What were some of the comments? So that's one common thing. I know you talked a lot about this in your presentation around you visited a lot of centers over that period just to look what was going on, understand their thought process. The one you touched on there is obviously very fundamental. I think it's probably evident in the majority of the workforce until you kind of make that point. But were there any other significant points that you found that probably similar along those lines, that actually it was just a mindset thing that they believed, but actually didn't understand the bigger picture?
Yeah. Two of them come to mind. One is that most of the center directors became center directors because they were great teachers. Okay. And they got into the industry because they had an incredible passion for young children. So when you think about that career path to that center director, it's a completely different job. And they can easily be overwhelmed by a lot of business things like marketing and selling and enrolling and all those types of things. So the mindset is, oh my gosh, I have to do a lot of things that frankly, I care less about. Yes. I actually came in this industry because I just loved young children. And I think a lot of this, it is a mindset of you need to continue to have that passion for young children and not think about selling. You're just talking about what you have passion for and realizing that you want to continue to be the best in your community, which means that you have a full center. So that's one. The second one really quickly, Nick, was we were really blown away. We set an audacious goal in Childcare that we wanted every center, imagine more than 1,400 centers. We wanted all of them to be NACE accredited. In the US, that's the National Association for the Education of Young Children. They govern the highest quality standards in the industry across the country. Now, each state has different parameters, but we said, because we are a large provider, we would love for all of our centers to be NACE accredited. Okay. The most common response that we got from our centers was, we're not quite ready. We're not quite ready for that process. Time consuming. They felt like they had more work to be done. And when we started getting in the process, our center directors started to shift, saying, I always thought I wasn't ready, but I just had to get into the deep end and realize I should be proud of the things that we're doing. It's an evolution and a journey that I want to be on to really be committed to the very best standards of the industry. So it's a little bit of this mindset of just jump in the deep end and see where you are to really make the right progress, to become proactive. And again, just to ultimately be the best provider in your community.
I honestly, I just think what you've said is gold, because the way I interpret this, there are centers out there right now. Typically, we work with centers anywhere between 1 and 16, 20 locations. What I love is a company of that size just simplified everything down to these basic metrics of things to work towards, because now everyone can buy into that. Hey, it's not about just the sales roles. And I've got a question for you on that one in a second, but it's not just about sales now, it's about passion. Just show your passion for what you do. And then you touched on earlier about, it's not just my children, it's about the whole center. And then the third one around NACE accredited. I think do you feel it was that fear of getting started? Because that's a lot of the barrier sometimes, isn't it?
Nick, you're absolutely right. It's daunting.
Yes.
It's a long process. Do they have the time? Will they actually get accredited? Are their teams ready for it? There's so much anxiety around the process and the readiness that we just really try to get our employees excited about the process to achieve that standard. And I'll tell you, more times than not, when a center director was finally accredited, they said, I can't, I'm so proud. And I can't believe how I was limiting myself by not getting into the process.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's a really good learning for all of your listeners. I'm sure they're thinking, gosh, there's so much that I can do. Don't worry about it. Commit to quality. And by the way, when you start doing those things, you start shifting to be proactive. You start committing to higher quality standards. And by the way, you're going to start seeing families start to enroll as well because they feel your commitment to excellence.
I love that. Do you mind? Quick question. We didn't plan for this, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. And I won't tell you my opinion first, but do you believe that the directors of centers should be doing the follow-up in terms of the phone calls and booking the tours, or just doing the actual tour itself?
That's an interesting question. I think that I think the best answer is every center needs to decide how to best leverage the team. So if the center director, just one example, if the center director is building their team and they're really focused around improving the experience for families, they're likely going to be up and around at drop off, at pickup, really engaging with families, supporting teachers and so forth. If you're in that situation, you're probably best served finding, maybe you have an assistant director, maybe you have a program specialist that can do some of those tasks that require you to sit at your desk and follow up and look at the phone calls and respond and get that quick turnaround. Other center directors have the capacity to do that, but I always feel like it's about figuring out every step and then positioning people to have the clarity that this is your role, this is why it's important, and this is how we're going to follow up to position everybody in the very best way.
I love that. I think, and I was very conscious of not telling you my opinion on this first, because I'm very strong-minded around, I don't think that they have, because, we do this all the time for companies now, and the amount of follow-up that's required in terms of speaking to those parents, trying to get a hold of those parents is so much. But if we take the points you made around passion and the NACE accreditation, because that drives everything, technically, it drives enrollment, everything. But I believe my mindset, I think, is a little bit very similar in some respect, but they should be definitely doing the accreditation piece, all that drop off and everything around the interaction, but also doing the tours, I think, is a significant part. But I think we're living in a world now, and I mean this with the greatest respect, if you are trying to compete with the bigger companies, they have designated teams that are literally doing this full time. And it's hard, to be able to compete with that if you don't have that infrastructure. So I was really interested to hear your point on that. So I appreciate you sharing.
No, and Nick, I think you raise a good point. If you are concerned that you're competing with larger providers who have call centers for inquiries and all those things, and by the way, I support a lot of those, and obviously I came from that world. I want the smaller providers to know that you have a competitive advantage but exactly what you said, Nick. If I'm a parent that wants to enroll my child and I call a broad call center number, there's very little emotional connection that I'm having. It's one step to get me to that center.
Correct. Yeah.
If a center takes those calls, it immediately can establish a personal relationship, ask questions about the child to get them interested in your center. Now, to your point, we more times than not at Childcare, we wanted the center director to be highly responsible for the relationships between the teachers, the families, the environment, the experience. It was oftentimes the assistant director that managed a lot of the inquiries. They managed chasing checks right? Accounts receivable, billing, so forth, because it was a really good way to learn the business and prepare them to be a center director.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So it's all about, but I don't want anybody that's a smaller provider saying we're at a disadvantage to the larger providers that have all these resources and separate teams managing. Like, yes, they do that for a reason, but think about not having that as a competitive advantage.
Oh, no, I completely agree. I think there's a place for both. There's the place, as we always say, our priorities work with family run, but there's always a place for the big corporate, and there's a place for family run too. I think from our side, it's more about what I try to advocate is getting the owners to realize that sometimes maybe the center director isn't the best one to be doing the best person to do the tour part, but maybe not necessarily the administration piece of the volume of calls or that volume of follow-up that's required sometimes. Is there someone that's a better fit in the company to do that role? So I appreciate your point on that.
Yeah, and Nick, it almost, if I can segue to one of the points around when a center director thinks about their team and how they leverage it, we talk a lot about optimization. How optimized is your team to help you be the best provider in your community? And let me explain what that really means. And this will be a repeat for you, because this is a big part of my message in that conference that I think is just resonating with a lot of people. So if you're a center director and you're thinking about your whole staff, obviously teachers, but you may have other people, whether you have a cook, if you have a program specialist, maybe you have an assistant director. I want you to think about all of them. Now, there's a lot of research. This is all research based. But I want you to first to think about your very best employee. And if you're listening to this podcast, I want you to think about that employee, the very best employee you have in your center. It's the one that is so incredibly reliable. They not only do their job, but they're filling in where they see opportunities. They're the ones that give you great ideas. Parents love them because they're engaging with them every single day. And they're going above and beyond, right? The technical term, the discretionary effort is massive, right? So if you think about that employee, the research says across, and this is US based, the global insights is actually a little bit lower than the US. On an average, US companies, a third of employees are described in the way that I just described them. Really, really great talent. Now, the opposite, I want you to think, hopefully you don't have anybody, but a lot of centers may have teachers that you feel just are working against you. They're never happy. They're complaining. You feel like you're constantly trying to get more out of them, but they're actually working against you. They're defiant, right? Those employees on a research basis represents 20% of the US population. So you have 30% really doing well, really helping you thrive. You have 20% that are actually working against you. That leaves 50% of the US workforce in the middle. I call them paycheck collectors, right? They're showing up, but they're not going above and beyond. They're doing the bare minimum to get their paycheck. In our business, it's what drives high turnover. They come and go, right? They're going to leave your center to go somewhere else for maybe maybe it's 10 cents an hour. It's very transactional, which creates a big risk for you to create those emotional relationships with families. So that can represent 50% of your team. And that becomes the biggest challenge. Now, if you think about that 50% plus the people that are actively working against you, now that's 70%. 70% of an entire center really not providing everything. When I say optimize, how optimize is your workforce? I work with a lot of different companies in this industry and outside the industry. Most of them will say, I'm not very optimized if I'm really thinking about the categories that you just took me through. What I want every center director to think about is, how do I get more of the 30%? And it's possible. right? So in Childcare, I'll give you an example. Back in 2012, it was a very difficult place to work. Employees did not like being there. 30,000 employees. Our ratio was 1 to 1. We had one actively engaged employee, loved being there, to every one employee that was actively vocal about how bad it was to work in that environment. And we had 8 people that were very transactional, just kind of sitting on the fence. Now, when we transformed the culture, our ratio based on Gallup, who was our partner and did a lot of studies, our ratio was 14-1. We had 14 actively leaning in and giving high discretionary effort to one actively disengaged employee. So think about that for a second. In a center, if you had 14 highly engaged teachers really leaning in, telling stories to parents when they pick up, teachers going to the other classroom, younger age groups to say, hey, I want to meet you as a parent because your child's going to be in my classroom next year. And I really want to drive. That's all discretionary effort. That is a game changer in terms of optimizing your workforce. So if you want to be the best provider in your community, start by thinking about your workforce and how optimized they are. Be real about discretionary effort. How much discretionary effort are you getting from your team? And then you want to start to think about, how do I get more of my employees really leaning in the very best way?
That was the piece for me that you delivered at the event, that really, out of the whole event, which was the whole event was gold, but that one piece for me was the diamond out of everything, really. Because and my take on that was, okay, so if we look at anyone now, any business out there, and you've got that ratio, let's imagine you've got 30% and you've got that 50%. The way I think you presented it, and correct me if I'm wrong, was just how do we start to work with getting one person over and then the next? Is that probably the right way to look at this? Or?
That's exactly right, Nick. I think the first piece is for all center directors, think about where you're spending probably the majority of your time, and it's with that actively disengaged employee. They are a problem. So you are distorting time, trying to solve that problem, and they are creating a lot of issues. There's very little return from that time spent. So to your point, Nick, the other issue with that employee is that they're trying to recruit other people to be actively disengaged, right? So they're saying to people at lunch break, can you believe this place? Like our manager has no clue how hard we work. And when was the last time you felt like you were given a pat on the back? Like, I don't know why we're here, right? They're constantly trying to recruit. The tough thing is the 30%, the people that come in and give their all, they're sort of like, I'm fine. They're not really recruiting other people. They just simply think, well, they have their own issues. I don't really want to bother with that. I want to do a great job. So those are the dynamics. So as a center director, you want to distort your time celebrating your highly engaged people that are coming in every single day. They absolutely need to know that you see them and value them. But then to your point, Nick, you really want to target the middle 50% and move those one at a time, give them a reason to be a highly engaged. Now in the conference, I assign them colors, right? So your green employees are the ones that have your back and come in every day and go above and beyond. Your orange is the 50%, right? They're sitting on the fence and they're being recruited by the red employees, the small percentage that are just really working against you. So you want to really think about those orange employees and individualize, really think about what are their drivers? How do I listen to them? How do I give them a reason to believe in what I'm doing and to start to lean in more? And at a scaled place, we did that with 30,000. So I keep giving that scale because I want directors to know that it's really possible to immediately shift orange if you focus on them to become green. and you will see your entire environment change. Nick, I'm sure you've been into a lot of centers where you walk in the front door and it just feels like the high energy. People are engaging you, even if they've never met you. Hey,
Oh,
how
yeah.
are you? Thanks for being here. What's your name? Let me, think about that high energy. It translates to high occupancy. So when I talked about the mindset of really focusing where it matters, optimizing your team, shifting orange to green can have a massive impact on so many things, from occupancy, safety, all those types of things that run a very high quality center.
Wei-Li, honestly, it's gold what you're delivering, because at its simplistic level, it is simple if we put it into that mindset. It's just getting people to realize that from majority of us probably do spend a significantly disproportionate amount of time on that part of the workforce that actually you're not going to be able to get over, to convert them as such. And ironically, it was interesting. There was, as you said that, they're actively recruiting. We were at Disney recently, and actually it was Universal. It was Universal. And there was a person there at Universal in front of us was actually actively recruiting that middle band, that orange. And I can see it. I can immediately relate to that scenario. So off the back of it, I'm really excited about this conversation, because I just think it's so, at the core of it, it's simple, but it's just, how do we get started? Where would you recommend? Is it a case that people should first of all try and identify where those workforce sit?
Yeah.
What would be your tips to get started here?
So I think the first step is to have a very strong point of view of where your center is, right? So I look at each center as its own business, own community. Okay. So the easiest way to do this, and there's tools that I can provide that help them make sense, but I'll just simplify it even further. If you were to imagine a chart, right? There's a horizontal axis and then there's a vertical axis. The horizontal axis, let's assume that is measured by occupancy.
Okay.
Right? From 0% empty center to fully occupied 100%. Now, I believe center directors first need to realize the more children you have in a center, the higher occupied you are, actually the easier it is to run that center. You have much more flexibility in labor and all those type of things. That, Nick, was a mindset shift. Center directors couldn't believe it.
No.
Because they had, they're 50% occupied, or, and it was so much more difficult to run those centers. So think about that spectrum, and I want you to draw a line, and based on your occupancy, just draw an X there. The vertical axis is a reflection of your culture. Now, the easiest way is maybe to think about, you could think about an actual data that you have, your turnover rate, maybe your retention rate. Are you retaining, the majority of your team, or do you have high turnover? It's an hourly business, so turnover tends to be pretty high. But if you are a center that has, 70, 80, 100% turnover, that becomes a problem, because parents, when their children see new faces, it starts to impact their experience. So retaining teachers is a huge piece. So think about the vertical axis. At the bottom, let's think about this as retention. If you're not able to retain anybody, you're near the bottom. If you have 100% retention, particularly of your green employees, you're at the top, right? Now, based on those two metrics, you're putting those two parameters together, right? That is your starting point. And Nick, with all the data that is available in the center, I've simplified it to two. I want you to think about occupancy. I want you to think about how well you retain your very best teachers. Now, you're going to fall in one of the four quadrants, right? One of the four squares. If you have low occupancy and high turnover, you're in a difficult situation, right? So your starting point there is to really think about stabilizing your teachers. right? It's hard to enroll families when you have a very difficult environment. Families tend to see that pretty quickly, right? So your first step, if you're in that quadrant, low occupancy, high turnover, is to think about, how do I just stabilize my teachers? Maybe you need to have honest conversations around your own leadership. Maybe you need to listen to them better. Maybe they don't feel appreciated. Maybe there's some elements of pay, or you've got to figure out the root issue and address that. We are in a low pay industry. I will tell you, by far, the centers that created great environments, teachers never left because of pay. They left because they loved working for that center director in that great environment. So think about that. Now, if you are higher occupied, let's say your occupancy is over 70%, so you're more on the horizontal, but you have high turnover. We call that unsustainable, right? You're doing a lot of good things. Families are enrolling there, but at some point the turnover is going to catch up to you. Families are going to start voicing their concerns. So your immediate step there is also to figure out, how well are you listening, responding, supporting, embracing, celebrating, inspiring your teachers. It comes down to your leadership to think about moving orange to green, celebrating them, and really helping them create great experiences for your families. The opposite side, I have been in centers where teachers love it there. They have a great time every day, but they don't have a lot of occupancy.
Okay.
So if you're in that quadrant, we call that inefficient. Right? You've done a really nice job creating a place where people like to work, but they're inefficient because they don't measure themselves against filling up their classrooms. They're just having a good time. I like to think, Nick, if you've ever been in a restaurant, all you want is a refill on your iced tea, and you're looking around, and you see the wait staff hanging out the bar, and they're laughing, telling stories and so forth.
Yes.
That's an inefficient business. They like being together, but they forgot that their focus is to support their customer.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So that's the same issue. They love being there, low occupied, they're inefficient. What you want is highly occupied with low turnover. That I call optimized. So when you're in that optimized state, if you've ever been in a center, it's full and teachers are thriving. They love it. They're helping each other. You can feel the positive energy around.
Yes.
That's where you, as a center director, you want to think about how to get to that optimization. So hopefully that explanation of the different quadrants and simplifying the business to help a leader think about, where am I and what do I need to do to start addressing my center to move the needle towards becoming a highly optimized center.
I absolutely love that. I just think, I love how you break this down because I think sometimes there's a danger that we feel overwhelmed. There's so many things that we need to work on, but what really needs that time and attention right now? Wei-Li, I honestly cannot thank you enough. The value you have provided, there are so many nuggets in there for people. I think one of the things we need to do off the back of this is, for everyone watching, is go through and just summarize. You gave so much value, game-changing things there, and I honestly cannot thank you enough. Is there any, just to wrap up on this, is there any other tips, last-minute tips, or last things you would say that you would recommend just to wrap this up?
My last tip, Nick, is be honest with yourself. And everybody is great at certain things and really struggle with other things. And it's important to be honest with yourself around what you're great at and what you struggle with, because it starts to give you a very clear lens on how you need to leverage other people and what might get in your way to optimize your workforce to create great experiences. So it always starts with the leader. So that's my last tip. And I would tell you, if you are self-aware and you move to optimize your workforce, you're going to find teachers will help out in your tours. They're going to create great experiences in the classrooms. Your licensing infractions and safety issues will go down. You will have a safer, more productive, amazing center for your community. And I think, Nick, with your passion and your mission, I would love to see all of your listeners just have thriving businesses providing the best experiences for everyone in their community.
No, Wei-Li, honestly, I cannot thank you enough. I know lots of people are going to be listening to this as a replay. What you do a phenomenal job of consulting now in this space. Do you mind telling everyone, if they're interested, about how could they reach out? Where do you provide support? Where are the opportunities for them to explore more with you?
Yeah, so after I left Childcare, I ran a number of other businesses before I realized we are at a place where leaders need to think about driving performance through their employees and creating better experiences. So long story, intersecting culture and performance in a much better way. So I launched a business called Win Consulting, and your users can go out and take a look at my website. It's just win.consulting. And through that website, there's a lot of tips and tools. The matrix that I talk through around, I call it the velocity matrix, can help them start to diagnose and give them tools around how to start to simplify their focus to really create a great business in their community.
I love that. Everyone, what I would love you to do as well, if you don't mind, anyone that's listening to this or watch the replay over on YouTube, make sure you show some love down below. I'd really appreciate that, because I think what Wei-Li has shared with us here is absolute gold. And to be able to summarize that into a 40-minute session is just, I honestly cannot thank you enough, Wei-Li. You are having a huge impact on the world. What you've done for me here is your session, I think in the past, and being very open and honest here, what I loved about how you talked about this, we as I said, we work with family-run businesses. And I love that how you've come from that corporate world, but you really meticulously paid attention to culture. And that for me just highlights that if a company of that size realizes that that was the pain point for them, how much of an impact would that have on a family-run business if we could just get all those things aligned as well? So I cannot thank you enough. You've done a phenomenal job delivering great value for us. Wei-Li, thank you so much for joining us. I hope at some point we can connect once again in the future. You just shared such great knowledge, and I'm sure our listeners are extremely grateful for you being here. And just thank you once again from the bottom of my heart for you giving up the time once again.
Absolutely, Nick. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to connecting again soon.